In January 2025, Indonesia began mobilizing its national logistics network for a single goal. They call it the Free and Nutritious Meals Program, or MBG. The government is targeting 83 million recipients. The mandate covers everyone from toddlers and pregnant women to students in upper secondary school. This chart shows the sheer weight of the program. The government earmarked Rp400 Trillion, roughly $20 billion for these meals, exceeding the central government's planned health expenditure of $244 trillion. This single initiative now consumes 9% of Indonesia's total state budget. This is the flagship quick win of the Prabowo Gibran administration, a central promise of their campaign that moved into rapid implementation immediately after the inauguration. Most global school feeding programs are limited to primary students in high-need areas. Combining universal provision with this massive scale, Indonesia is attempting a unique experiment in social policy. Indonesia has launched a $20 billion macroeconomic experiment that tests the absolute limits of state capacity. Initial polling suggested a massive political success. By March 2025, survey data from the IEAS Yusof Ishak Institute showed an approval rating of 82.4%. However, researchers identified this support as broad but shallow. Only 18.9% of respondents expressed strong approval for the rollout. This chart reveals how quickly that sentiment began to erode. By October 2025, follow-up data showed a clear decline in public satisfaction. In just 7 months, satisfaction with the MBG dropped 0.27 points on a 4-point scale. The decline followed a series of high-profile implementation failures, specifically mass food poisoning incidents that reportedly affected 15,000 students by October. Despite massive logistical friction and these public health scares, the $20 billion policy has managed to avoid a total political collapse. Understanding why this support persists requires us to look past the health data and find the program's true political anchor. We can begin by breaking down the survey demographics to see who actually forms the bedrock of the program's support. Standard welfare economics assumes that those with the highest material need, like low-income families or households with children, would be the most vocal supporters. This regression chart plots how characteristics impact approval. Surprisingly, having children or a pregnant woman in the home does not reliably predict support. Objective financial need is also a poor predictor. Income and household savings show negligible impact. Because the MBG is universal, benefiting children in wealthy private schools as much as those in rural poverty, political support has decoupled from direct personal deprivation. Aside from youth and lower levels of formal education, the primary demographic drivers of approval remain largely unexplained by standard material metrics. Citizens appear to be evaluating the policy based on a broader macro-level expectation rather than personal gain. The survey data points toward policy beliefs, the specific, broader economic outcomes that Indonesians hope this massive $20 billion investment will ultimately achieve. This chart tracks which perceptions drive the highest program approval ratings. Expectations for economic stimulus are just as influential as health outcomes. Belief that the MBG will support local businesses and secure the food supply drives approval as much as the goal of reducing malnutrition.
By contrast, the public is largely indifferent to operational details. Factors like the specific budget per meal or whether the rollout is strictly on target have almost no impact on whether people support the policy. The sheer scale of feeding 83 million people daily makes centralized procurement impossible for the Indonesian state. To execute this mandate, the government must utilize a highly localized supply chain. The Rp400 Trillion flows through regional hubs directly into the hands of local farmers. This creates a mechanic of labor absorption. The money routes into thousands of community kitchens. These kitchens function as local economic engines, hiring workers and purchasing produce from the immediate community to prepare the daily meals. Public approval of the MBG serves as a direct proxy for whether this local economic stimulus is actually reaching the neighborhood. Citizens evaluate the MBG's success through the lens of community wealth generation and the integration of local supply chains. The MBG is an immense decentralized economic and agricultural policy presented as a public health intervention. But there is a systemic tension that could fracture this economic coalition. It involves the concept of distributive justice, the public's perception of who actually deserves state support. This chart links subjective income and political views to program approval. There is a striking paradox in the subjective income data, how people rank their own wealth compared to others. Respondents who perceive themselves as being in the poorest 20% of society are the least likely to support this universal welfare program. This demographic prefers targeted welfare, wanting state benefits restricted only to the most deprived areas and children. This stems from a psychological sensitivity to systemic fairness. When citizens feel intense economic pressure, they become highly critical of government waste. Seeing children from wealthy backgrounds receive the same state-funded meal as the poor triggers immediate resentment, undermining support for a universal model. This skepticism competes directly with the broad partisan loyalty shown by Prabowo's voters, pulling the policy in two different directions. Perceptions of unfairness and inequality represent a far greater threat to this universal program than logistical failures or objective poverty. Sustaining the MBG requires the government to balance partisan loyalty against the realities of supply chain logistics and class-based perceptions of fairness. If we revisit the localized supply chain model, we see how easily operational failures can dismantle the political support base. When food poisoning incidents occur at the kitchen level, they create friction points that ripple through the entire economic model. A failure in food safety does more than harm students. It halts the local economic multiplier that generates public approval in the first place. The drop in satisfaction documented between March and October 2025 is the direct result of these localized economic engines beginning to stall. To keep the coalition from fracturing along class lines, the administration must stabilize the rollout and ensure safety immediately. They must prove that a $20 billion fiscal injection can integrate into local communities without triggering a backlash over distributive justice. Indonesia's grand experiment demonstrates that in developing economies, even a massive public health initiative is ultimately judged by its macroeconomic return on investment.